Hey everyone, and welcome back to the study Chronicles. This is episode 3. We're going to be continuing in our list of spot importance for spots that are going to come up in 6 max that are the highest EV to get better at and to study. So today we're going to start looking at the button versus the big blind. That's the next node in the list that we have right here. I've been going through this list of spot importance and drilling the GTO wizard score. Every time we play a spot, I'm going to update this list, and it's going to give us the priority of what to study. So far, we've just completed the small blind versus big blind in episodes 1 and 2. Now I'm going to go and tackle the button versus the big blind. So I'm going to open up wizard, and just like before, we're going to go over the pre-flop ranges before I dive into creating a drill and practicing the spot. And then from all of the drilling and practicing, we are going to pull some heuristics, take some notes, and we're creating a list of things that I potentially have a leak in, or just some good heuristics that we might find along the way. So button versus big blind. We're going to first play from the perspective of the button and then from the perspective of the big blind. So let's take a look first at the ranges. Like always, I'm using the 100 general 500 GTO ranges on GTO wizard. And we're going to have button raise, and big blind is going to defend. So before we look at anything further, let's look at the button's opening range. This is a fairly universal range when it comes to picking and choosing combos. I think if you look at most pre-flop ranges for 6 max, especially on the button, you'll see a lot of the same hands come up. Depending on the rake, you might see some of the weaker hands disappear. But for the most part, this is going to be close to what most players are implementing pre-flop. And I think a lot of players are interested in playing a more exploitative strategy. And whenever someone wants to figure out, whether they should play exploitative or game theory oriented or some kind of mix of their own, I always recommend just sticking with the game theory, the solver for pre-flop, because you're not going to gain a huge edge on players that you're playing with for the first time pre-flop unless you can know exactly what their range looks like. And in order to do that, you have to play a decent amount of hands. So it's really good to just come into a new game, into a new stake with a solid strategy, something that's consistent that you can start off with. And then if you see that the big blind is overfolding, then you can start exploiting that by increasing the combos you're opening on the button or something like that. But for the most part, I always just recommend playing a sound strategy pre-flop. It's easier. It's proven to be, effective. And that's what I've done for most of my career. I don't deviate too often pre-flop. That being said, let's take a look. So Jack 3 suited is going to be the worst. Again, we always look at the threshold hands, right? For opening, so 10-5, 8-5, 5-3 suited, Ace-3 offsuit, King-7 offsuit, Jack-8 offsuit. So not too surprising. The offsuit combos are going to have some kind of straight draw equity. The ones without straight draws, like Jack-7 offsuit, are just off the cusp of being playable. But again, if the big blind's overfolding, then you can probably add these in. Hands like offsuit weak, 8-5, 7-5, 9-7, etc. These are all going to be folds. Pretty straightforward, nothing to talk about here. I think most of you guys are going to be familiar with pre-flop opening ranges. And then defending the big blind. This is going to change drastically depending on the rake, depending on the size that's used to open. So for this node, we're using a 2.5x open, and then the big blind is going to defend here with a range like this. So again, we have the threshold hands, which are going to be 10-3, 10-4, 9-5. And then you can see this little loop here with the weaker suited connected cards, 5-2, 6-3, 7-4, 8-5. The offsuit combos, this is going to surprise some people if you haven't looked at big blind defense frequencies, but offsuit weak aces are actually going to be folds. So ace-2, ace-3 are the weakest ones, and then even ace-6 offsuit, because it's in this like middle of the pack type of offsuit ace where you can't make a straight with it, but the kicker isn't really that high. So if you make top pair with a 6, it's not going to be as strong as a 7, 8, or 9, of course. And so the solver really doesn't like ace-6 offsuit in a bunch of different scenarios, and ace-3 and ace-2 offsuit. So keeping that in mind, it is a fairly tight defense frequency if you're used to playing something like tournaments or whatever. But yeah, you have a 3-bet frequency here with 10s plus out of the big blind. Now this is going to be a strategy that is using a 13 big blind 3-bet, which is maybe larger than some players are used to, but in theory, it's good to have a larger 3-bet out of position. We do this because it reduces the in-position advantage that the button may have, and we're going to have some really strong hands that we want to be getting our money in with, like 10s plus, and then we have a more polar strategy that is happy to fold to a 4-bet, hands like weak suited kings, like king 5, king 4, king 3, and then maybe something like a queen X suited hand with a decent blocker. Anything that basically blocks a lot of the 4-bet pairs from the button, this is going to be included in our range for 3-betting. So if we see here, when we 3-bet, you'll see the button can 4-bet hands like pocket 10s, right? So it makes sense that we might have, well, pocket 10s, pocket jacks, pocket queens, of course. So it makes sense that we might have some blocker combos with suited 10x in it, with suited jack x in it, with suited queen x in it, because these are blocking all of those stronger combos that villain can 4-bet. Also, you have the suited, ace king, the suited, the offsuit ace queen, the offsuit ace jack. So like blocking these stronger hands as well is very beneficial out of the big blind. So we have our 3-bet range here. Then we have some suited connectors. These are going to have good playability post flop. Making straights or flushes is obviously strong. And a mix of offsuit broadways, again, having good blockers to the button's value range for opening. Yeah, this is one of the spots where I think it's really important to get comfortable with 3-betting weaker hands, because I think I see it too often where a lot of recreational players just aren't ever thinking of 3-betting jack 4 suited. They think it's probably just spew. But there is a lot of logic behind 3-betting combos like this. And so getting comfortable with these weaker suited combos for 3-betting, I think you'll find it's difficult to play against that. If you're the button and you're getting 3-bet and you're really unsure if I have something like jack 5 suited or if I have something like pocket kings, it's very tricky. The polarized range is constructed in a way that it's going to be profitable to have some of these weaker hands in our 3-bet range. All right. Let's move on. So once we defend, which is going to lack 10s plus, it's going to lack some of these stronger suited aces, offsuit aces. It is more geared towards these hands here, these hands here, and these hands here. So you'll see that there are some like queen high, jack high, king high boards, which are going to favor the button, but the big blind is going to be able to have some strong hands depending on the side cards to the board. So we'll probably find some of those in our drills. Okay, so let's make a drill. Go. Let's create a new one. Button versus big blind. So we're going to be the hero in the button. This is general 500. Looks good. Save that. And we're going to do button. There we go. All right. So we have the button versus the big blind single raise pot. Let's start drilling. And as spots come up, we'll start to look at them. So first off, the button is going to often have the option because big blind is mostly checking. There are going to be some leads from the big blind, but the first thing we want to look at, again, aggregated reports. What is our overall strategy as the button once we get checked to? Because that's going to be the most common scenario in this node, is that you're going to find the big blind is mostly going to be checking. And you can see here, there's a 95.9% check. So there is a lead frequency, but it's very low. So the most common thing is big blind checks, and now it's on us. Well, what are we going to do? Here is our strategy. We are checking less frequently than betting. So this is important because I think there's a lot of spots where when we were looking at the small blind prior, the check frequency was way higher. We were out of position. It was a very different scenario. Now we're in position. It looks like we're betting aggressively, okay? And we're mostly using the small bet sizing with a mix of medium, large, and even over bets. So it's going to be important to know how to use all of these sizings, or you could combine these two sizings together to be one sizing. But I do recommend you have at least a small, medium, and over bet sizing if you're going to pick and choose how many sizings you want to use. And we'll go over, sizing in the drills as well. But I think a lot of players oversimplify when it comes to c-bet sizing. I think they just choose one sizing per texture and use it, and then don't use the other ones at all. Which is a strategy. I think you can find some success with that. But personally, I like to have a mixture of sizings. I feel like grouping hands together is going to help you understand why you're using those sizings and why you're using certain, strategies in position. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So mostly using the small sizing and a mix of all the other sizings. I think that versus a lead, I think that's the other thing that we might need to look at. Just in case it doesn't come up because it is rare, but against a lead, we're going to have, oops, why did I, flops, there we go. We're not folding very often. We are mostly calling, and then we're mixing in a lot of raising 50% compared to raise 100%. So this should be our main strategy here, is raising 50% or calling versus a lead. So keeping that in mind as well. So this is just like the macro of the situations. So this is, if I ever have again, if I have like a brain fart and I don't know what to do in a scenario, I'll default to what I know is going to be the most common strategy. So if someone leads, I'll most likely call. If I'm stuck between, do I fold this? Do I call this? I don't know. I'll just call. Same thing with, c-betting. If I can't figure out a size to c-bet and the big blind checks to me, I'm going to be like, okay, well, I guess I can use a small sizing here, right? Now, of course, it's going to change on every different board texture, but you can't go too wrong with something like that. Or if I don't know for sure if I should check or bet, then I could just default to checking, right? All right, so that's what I'm going to do here. And let's get into it, shall we? 10-7-5, two spades. We have a strong hand. We have top pair. We have a queen of spades. This is a hand that wants to likely bet more often than check. As we know, we're going to bet more frequently in general. How is this texture? I think it's going to be in our favor slightly because we're going to have more overpairs. We're going to have tens plus. As we saw, the big blind is 3-betting tens close to a pure frequency. So they're going to lack some of the top sets here. They're also going to be 3-betting 10-7 suited at a frequency, and we are just going to be opening it pure. So we're going to have more 10-7 suited than they will. Which means I think we could probably have a variety of sizings here. I think if we had something like pocket aces, it would make sense to overbet. If we had something like 8-9 suited, it would make sense to overbet. So this hand, I think, doesn't quite fall into an overbet category. It's not strong enough. We'd rather do that with like jacks plus or ace 10 or 7-5 or something like that. So I think large and medium are going to be my default sizings here. And I'm going to go with the large this time. So it looks like check is the most common thing on this texture with this hand, but we can use the small, medium, and large sizings. And if we are going to use a bet sizing, it looks like large is the most common. I'm surprised at how much we want to check on this texture. Maybe if we look into it further in the info tab, we can figure out why we're checking so often with top pair here. So it looks like universally we are checking slightly more than normal, which maybe is because the big blind doesn't have as much of a disadvantage on this texture. If we take a look at best hands, we'll see that the button does have the best hands advantage. Looks like big blind is going to have a good hands advantage. We're going to have a lot of, okay, so this is what I am gathering from this as to maybe why we're checking at a little higher frequency than normal. We have a lot of weak hands and good hands, which generally want to check back. Anytime you see in these equity buckets that you have a high frequency of good hands and weak hands, you're going to see a lot of checking because we're going to want to bet larger with our best hands and our trash hands that have some equity, and then our good hands and weak hands want to typically check back. So we're going to see a strategy that involves a lot of checking back. And then also when we see that villain is going to have this kind of configuration, we can gather that they're going to be kind of capped, really geared towards medium strength hands. So we're not going to get 3 streets of value very often against players like this, unless they, you know, have some kind of check raise for value or whatever, or bluffs. So yeah, we do have this concentration here. So maybe that could be why we're checking back a bit more, protecting some of our weaker range, and our good range just wants to get to showdown. I think Queen 10 falls into a best hands category, but maybe not. Let's have a look here. So if I highlight good hands, is Queen 10 off here? Yes, it is. But maybe Queen 10 with the spade is in the best hands. Yes, it is. So I imagine this is why. It's probably just on the cusp of being a good hand, not quite a best hand. So if we take a look through the equity now, if we get a little bit more specific about it, strategy or just equity, we'll see that Queen 10 off with a spade is at 76%. That is threshold best hands. If you look at the equity buckets, you can see here, best hands threshold is 75% and higher. So it's right on the cusp of being a good hand, which is why you might see it check back a little bit more. Yeah, pretty straightforward there. That being said, you're going to see jacks be a pure bet. This is going to have a lot of equity, and it's really good unblocking the top pair. Now, you are going to have some checkbacks for protection, for traps and whatnot, like with aces, which has a lot of equity. So you might ask, well, then why is that aces checking so much if they have so much equity? Well, it is good to have some stronger hands that check back that don't need as much protection, like aces, where there aren't any overcards that can come that will, you know, reduce your equity realization, reduce your actual equity in general. So jacks is a lot more vulnerable to something like king queen suited, ace queen offsuit, right? Like all of these combos can hit cards that can come on later streets, like a queen jack, or sorry, queen king or ace, and aces don't have to worry about that. So that's why you see a little bit of this reverse, like check frequency here. At the top, aces is going to check more often, and then towards the jacks combos, you're going to see that bet more often. But if you have a very, very strong hand, typically you just want to bet. You just want to be betting and getting your money in. That's the name of the game in position. You don't want to slow play too often with really strong hands. If you are going to slow play, it's going to generally be top pair hands like Queen 10, King 10, Jack 10, which aren't as high on that equity ranking. So that's why we see a lot of checking back with Queen 10. Now we turn a queen, great card to continue betting. In general for us, this is going to be a card that's better for us than villain. That being said, do we have an overbet? Do we have a large bet? Well, I think at this point it's safe to start categorizing this hand into a large overbet because it's very strong. This is going to be top of our range. Makes sense. It's part of our best hands category. We also could have a smaller size. So something like maybe bet 50 or bet 75 with some of our weaker hands that still might want some protection. Something like, I don't know, pocket jacks that don't typically want to, you know, bet 3 streets, but have a lot of value. Maybe something like ace 10, maybe something like, you know, I don't know, ace 7 perhaps, I don't know. But I think we're gonna have 2 sizings here, and this one can fall into a mix of either. I think it's gonna be fine to go medium, large, or overbet. I'm gonna I rolled a 76, which is a passive number. Let's go with the 75. I think 75 and 125 are going to be my 2 options. Maybe this is a pure overbet, but I'm gonna gamble with thinking that this is a 75. Yes, it is in fact a 75, and you can see that our 2 options are overbet and 75. So I think that's how the solver is going to construct the 2 different sizings there. And you see how I immediately just didn't even think about using a bet 33 or a bet 50, right? Even though I have those sizings in my strategy, it never popped into my head that that would be a thing to use. And that's because on the turn, you're typically going to polarize more often than on the flop. On the flop is where you're going to use a lot more of your smaller sizings, but on the turn and river, that's when you're going to start narrowing your range down. That's where you're going to start trying to get a lot of value from your strong hands. So you're going to want to typically bet larger on later streets. So even though I have this 4 sizing strategy on flop, turn, and river, most of the time I'm going to be using these 2 sizings on turn and river, and then some all in depending on the SPR, right? So it's important to understand that even though it looks like a very complicated scenario, it's not as bad as it seems. All right, so we go for the large bet on turn, we get raised, and now we have an option of either all in or call. Now, this is a spot where I think most people get monsters under the bed syndrome immediately. They just think, oh, this guy's got a set, this guy's got 2 pair, this guy's got like the nuts, right? But there's plenty of hands that they can turn into a bluff here that can either raise call or raise fold. Hands like straight draws with no spades, that maybe that would be a decent hand to turn into a bluff and fold on a jam. Or maybe they, you know, turn some spades into a bluff that they can now call a jam if we do jam on them. So there's a couple of things that go through my mind. One, do I need protection here? Is this a spot where I can just slow play and not worry and call most rivers, right? Because that's going to be important. If they do have a semi bluff with a lot of equity, we want to deny that equity, we want to jam. But if we don't need a lot of protection, for example, let's say we have queen 5 of spades here, that doesn't really need to jam because we're just going to be able to play most rivers. There aren't too many bad rivers that are going to make us fold. And so queen 10 with a queen of spades is kind of in that category. It's not a terrible spot to just flat and keep all of their weaker hands in. And I think that's where a lot of recreational players and players that are more comfortable without making tough decisions are leaking. I think people typically just always jam this spot. And when you jam this spot, you remove any weak hands bluffing by the river from villain, right? So you have to remember, in a node, when someone switches to representing as if they have a very polarized range, it doesn't make a lot of sense to jam into a polarized range with certain combos, because then you just allow them to play perfectly. So if they do have pocket 5s here, they're just going to snap call us. And if they do have something like 8-6 offsuit, they're going to snap fold. So it's important to not always just immediately jam in this scenario. That being said, I rolled a 15. I think the solver is probably going to mix jam and call. Hmm. There's not too many bad rivers for us, though. All right, I'm going to jam because I think the solver is going to mix, but oh, looks like it's a pure jam here. Okay. So maybe we would need a stronger hand to call instead. Maybe we want to slow play something like pocket fives, pocket sevens, or like I was saying earlier, queen five suited. Let's have a look. As I'm loading this up, I'm just going to grab a little bit more coffee. There we go. All right, so we see the response versus the raise, and so you'll see there are some hands that are going to call like 10-7 suited. Now this means in my head that queen 10 might just be so strong that we just want to jam against villain's value raising range, right? So a villain has something like 7-5 or queen 5 or queen 7. We're ahead of those combos. So maybe the solver just wants to jam the really strong value parts of the range on the turn, and then slow play something like sets or something like that. Let's look more into what is going to jam and call. So sevens, okay, so we have a jam with sevens, we have a jam with fives, some mix of call with fives. So what are the main calls here? Hands like pocket queens. Here we go. This is the one that we want to be trapping with. It's kind of clear. You know, we're blocking all of the two pair combos, right? We don't really need to worry too much about a spade or not. Interestingly, I'm seeing this trend where the queen of spades is jamming more than the non-queen of spades, which tells me there's a reason. I think villain is going to maybe have... I think I saw this in the fives hand too, where the five of spades is actually jamming more often than the non-five of spades. So if I wanted to figure this out more in depth, I would probably go back and forth between the two ranges, compare and see maybe there's a reason why not having a spade is beneficial for calling. Maybe it traps more of the semi-bluffs or something in villain's range with the five of spades. I don't know. I'd have to look through it more in depth. But that's part of the learning process, right? Like going back and forth between the ranges and comparing and contrasting. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do see that there are some stronger hands to call with. So if we target the best hands, looks like queens is the only hand in our range that really wants to slow play from the best hands category. And then if we look at the good hands, then here you go. Here's the queen five suited that almost pure calls. So this makes sense, right? Like I was saying before, it doesn't need a lot of protection, is behind some of the stronger hands in villain's range. So I think that might be another heuristic to think about is, are we behind all of the value combos in villain's range? Are we ahead of a lot of the value combos in villain range? Well, then that wouldn't figure out, that would mean whether or not we jam or not. Yeah. So this one, I guess, was a jam, pure, and villain shows up with the same hand after all that. I know this goes into depth, but I hope you guys are like learning how I'm approaching a situation so that you can apply it to your own study, right? The goal isn't to just be right or be wrong about something. It's about getting the heuristics correct and getting the reasoning correct to why this combo might be part of a call range or a shove range. Because if you can understand the logic behind a play, you can apply that not universally, but you can apply that to a lot of other scenarios in poker. And that's how I'm able to kind of guess what to do in a situation I've never studied before. Ace jack suited, button versus big blind. So we have that rare lead, and we know our default play is to call here with a mix of raise 50. I think this one's going to fall into a comfortable calling range, maybe a mix of raise 50 because of the backdoor diamonds in the range, but I think we're going to mostly call. I do think that I don't trap enough there. Yeah, it all really depends. My draw tool is stuck. It won't let me exit. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to call here. This is a good turn for villain to perhaps barrel. I am just going to check back. I don't think we have any value. I don't think we want to turn this hand into a bluff. I think we have showdown value. So I think this is a pretty clear check. It looks like there is some bet 33, which tells me maybe this is a value bet. Maybe this is a spot where villain's going to have something like Queen 7 suited and they don't want to always bet the turn. And so maybe we're getting value from a hand like that. I don't know. I don't think we're turning it into a bluff. But I am going to mostly check. And then on river, again, I think I'm just going to check. We have a lot of better hands to turn into a bluff. So villain did have a6 there. King, queen, 5. Now, remember our strategy on flop. We have all of the sizings. We have small, medium, large, and overbet. Now, this hand is a weaker trash hand with a gut shot straight draw. We have a 9 of spades, which is really relevant. So I think this hand fits nicely into a polarized category. It's going to be part of our weaker trash hands that have a bit of equity and have relevant blockers. We block king, queen. Sorry, not king, queen, king, jack. We block queen jack. We have the 9 of spades, which takes away the option of big blind to check raise us. Anytime we have blockers, it's not only the fact that we have, a removal of villains value hands straight away, but it's also that we have removal for the future, right? So if the spade comes in on the turn of the river, it allows us to bluff on later streets. So just having a spade in our hand is great here. I think we can bet large and overbet. I think the solver is going to most likely bet a high frequency here with all 4 options. If I had to narrow down what I want to do here, it's probably bet large and overbet though. So I'm going to bet large this time. I don't think I'm overbetting 40 to 42% of the time, but I do think I'm going to go for, surprise, we are overbetting 45% of the time. So pretty close to threshold decision there. But yeah, that is mostly their strategy here, which is a little bit of bet medium, bet large, and overbet, or check. Now, remember, the solver is going to check back 46% of the time universally, so there's always going to be that check frequency in there with most of your combos. So I think a lot of players may over c-bet in a spot like this with this hand. It is fine to check this back. King 10, 9. So on this flop, I think we're mostly going to bet medium and larger. I don't know if we're going to have too many small bets here. How does my hand fit into my range? Well, this is a medium strength hands. I don't really want to be betting this one 3 streets, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to bet here. That being said, there are some benefits to betting this. We have backdoor hearts. We protect our hand a little bit from something like Queen X. I don't know, not too much protection involved here, but I think we're mostly just going to check this combo. And if we were going to bet, it would probably be the smallest bet size available in the strategy. So I'm going to guess it's either going to be a check or bet 50. Okay, it does use 33, which I didn't expect to use, but that does make sense. If the solver is betting 33, then that's the lowest size that we're going to use. So we're going to bet that one, but we can check here as well. On turn, we pick up a heart draw. Now this is where we can actually bet for value. I think we just have enough equity. Typically, I know that when the action goes check, check, the most common size is going to be bet 75 or bet 125. I'm pretty sure. And we can verify that in this scenario by looking into the turn spot. So once it goes check, check on this texture and we get to the turn, I think you'll see the most common size, like I mentioned, is 75%. And then the next most common size is in fact the bet 125, but there is a bet 30 frequency here that we can't ignore. That's going to be more of the like mergey type value, maybe something like a week 10 that doesn't necessarily want to bet really large, maybe something like I don't know, 9x at a frequency. I'm not sure. Let's take a look, like something like queen 9 offsuit, which is kind of like maybe a little value, maybe a little bit of a bluff on certain rivers, you know, like kind of a merge bet. So if we have those kind of merge bets or protection bets with like a 10, we want to have a small sizing. And then anything stronger or more polarized, we're going to use the larger sizings most of the time, right? So if we have something like king queen, we're going to see mostly large and overbet sizings with that combo. So this one I think falls into a large sizing comfortably. We also do see a little bit of the small and medium bets. And then on river, do we have value, right? Like what can we get value from? Well, we can get value from 9x, weaker 10x, maybe ace 3. Kind of a narrow range for value. So if we are going to bet, I don't think we're going to see an overbet. I think we're going to see either something like bet 51 or bet 77 or check. So I think that's going to encompass our entire strategy. And you see how I can just like deduce from knowing that this is not an overbet, that it's probably not a check because we still have some value here. So that means that we're either betting medium or we're betting large. And I think I'm going to go... If medium is a thing here, I really like medium, but I'm going to go large this time. Okay, it is check. So this was a bit too thin for value. And I was wrong, right? So now it's good to know that, okay, on this river, maybe I want to be slightly stronger with like maybe jacks plus so that I can get value from all of the 10x, or maybe king x is going to be the cutoff. So I would look through at the threshold for value in a spot like this, and we will see that most of the good hands, these are all the good hands, right? They're mostly checking. So we have queens that are checking, jacks that are checking, ace 10 that's checking. So in fact, the only best hands that we're going to bet is king x and better. So we are betting the worst king x here for the 50% sizing. So the 50% sizing is being used. And then we have some of the best king x where we have ace king, and then the larger sizing is going to be used. So the solver is going to split our range a little bit between the 50 and the 77, and then a little bit of the overbets for the absolute best hands in our range. So something like pocket nines, we'll see some overbets, right? Or all ins. So just always think about what category your hand falls into in order to figure out what sizing you want to use. Is this a hand that is just top of the range, the absolute nuts? Well, you probably want to get all your money in. Is this a hand that's medium strength and can't get very much value? Well, then you probably want to use a medium-sized bet. It's very straightforward in that way, in that like it's not too tricky, but balancing them can be a little bit tricky. So like balancing the fact that you have this nutted hand at some frequency for the larger sizing instead of just always going all in, you know, just remembering that sometimes you need to protect some of the weaker hands in your range and bet hands that you plan on bet calling versus an all in. So we did make this mistake. Villain did fold 10-5, which shows another good reason why you shouldn't value bet a 10, because villain's not even paying off a 10. Queen 9-9, this is a board where I think we can have a fairly high c-bet frequency. Villain's going to lack a lot of the 9x in their range because they're 3-betting at a high frequency with 10-9 suited, jack 9 suited, queen 9 suited, king 9 suited. 9-8 suited. All of these combos are 3-betting at high frequency, and they're lacking all of the high cards like ace king, ace queen, king queen suited, etc. So I think this is going to be a high frequency small bet, and I rolled aggressive, so that works out well. We can also bet 50, in fact, so we can bet small or we can bet medium on this texture, which makes sense because of exactly what I just said earlier. Villain's going to lack a lot of the 9x, and we have all of the 9x. Turn is interesting. We would rather have a heart or a spade in our hand. So this is kind of like one of those hands that has some removal effects with like king 9, king queen, king jack, king 10. But at the same time doesn't have a lot of equity. So if we were to bet a hand like this, I think we might see a larger overbet, but I don't want to get too carried away. Always betting just every king here. I would rather have a bit more equity. So maybe something like, what's another king, I guess? Something with hearts or spades, right? So king 6 of hearts or spades, that's going to take a lot more priority over betting turn. So I rolled very passive. I'm going to check here, but I wouldn't be surprised if the solver does use this for a larger overbet. And you can see the solver does in fact like to use a large and even 250 overbet, 175 overbet. And there is this category of medium bet as well. So this is where it gets a little complicated. I would just combine the two overbets together. I wouldn't worry about using 250 and 175 as a balance, but I would worry about the 50 and the 75 because those are going to be two distinct categories. And I think the bet 50 is going to be weaker hands that want protection, maybe something like ace jack, maybe something like queen 2 suited if you open that. And then the 75 is going to be a bit stronger. So something like 9x, maybe like ace queen, maybe pocket kings. And then the 250 is going to be fairly, nutted. So it's going to be like straights, full houses, etc. But the solver does in fact check this at a frequency. And I think we might see more of a bet with spades or hearts, but maybe not. Maybe we want to just realize equity and check those back at a frequency as well. Let's see. King 6 suited. So it does look like we are going to be more aggressive with hearts. And spades is 28% check. So it's a mix for the front door flush draw and a more aggressive approach to the backdoor flush draw. And this is because if we have king 6 suited, we're blocking the weaker hands of villain for continuing, right? We're blocking the 7-6 suited that villain might have, the ace 6 suited, etc. Whereas the hearts is unblocking all of the front door flush draws that villain's going to float. And so that allows us to be more effective with bluffing on the turn and the river. So I think you're going to see a more aggressive strategy with the backdoor hands. Now we get to the river and villain bets. I think I'm just going to pure fold. Maybe there's some mix of raise here because we block king 10, because we block all the trip combos with king 9. But I'm going to fold. Ooh, look at that. That's interesting. So I guess that was right the second part of my statement, where this hand does have decent blockers for strong hands like king 10, like king 9, like king queen. These are all hands that villain is going to have to bet call at some frequency if I do raise. So having this king of clubs, very effective as a bluff. This is a cool spot. I like this spot. This is interesting. Let's have a closer look. And then we'll drill a couple more spots. Button versus big blinds. So if we filter for the weak and trash hands, or the trash hands, there aren't any weak hands. If we filter for the trash hands and we go to the raise frequency, we'll see that the solver picks a lot of the king X combos. I assume for precisely the reason I was saying earlier, is that they do a good job of blocking a lot of the value that's going to have to bet call on the river. So let's say we take a look at the raise. Now let's look at the response from the big blind. So again, whenever you want to look at the bluffs and the value ranges, look at both sides, because that's going to give you a good idea of where the bluffs are going to come from. So if you look at the call and the raise ranges, you'll see that we are in fact blocking king 9 with our king. We are in fact blocking king 10 offsuit, king queen. So just like I was saying before, having a king is very relevant here to the value of villain. This makes up a lot of their range for continuing versus a raise. So also having a weak kicker is going to have some effect of blocking something like queen 4, queen 5. So my king 6 combo is also low key, blocking queen 6, blocking 9-6 suited, blocking ace 6 suited, which is going to have some mix of call. Actually, that's a flush, sorry. But queen 6 of clubs, queen 6 of diamonds, those are going to be some of the hands to call with. Hazel just scared herself and woke herself up. I don't know what happened there. And then, yeah, so sometimes having this 6 of clubs isn't as intuitive to understand that this is actually a good side card to have with the king, which is why this combo, even though it doesn't really look like anything on this texture, is one of the most pure bluffs on the river. So it's spots like that where I think it starts clicking in your head, like, okay, maybe I need to rethink about how I'm looking at blockers. Maybe I need to rethink about how I'm removing value from villain. Okay, just checking out Hazel. She's good. Button versus big blind, king jack 8. This is a texture I think we can have all the sizings. Bottom pair is typically aggressive in these scenarios, I've found. For one, it removes strong combos from villain, and 2, it benefits a lot from just folding out any 2 overs. But on a texture like this, you're not really folding 2 overs out, right? Any combination of 2 over cards is going to have equity. So something like queen 10, something like 10-9, something like ace 10, something like queen 9. All these combos are going to have either a straight draw or some kind of pair. So I'm not sure how often I want to be betting this particular one on this texture. If the bottom pair was like a 4, I think it would be a lot better to c-bet, because then you can fold out hands like 7-6 suited, right? But on a texture like this, it's harder to fold out those combos. I'm going to check back. I rolled a passive number, and I think we're going to see a decent amount of checking with this combo. Yep, it's either going to be a mix of small bet or check. On turn, I don't think I want to turn my hand into a bluff, so we're just going to mostly check. And then on river, I think we just want to see a showdown. If villain bets, then I have a decision to make. We don't really block too much other than ace 8 suited. That might check turn. Maybe jack 8 suited, maybe king 8 suited. Maybe we block ace 5 of clubs, right? Don't forget that our kicker isn't necessarily just bad. We do block, anytime we have a club and there's hearts and diamonds and spades on the board, we block pairs, we block suited combos. So, yikes. This is actually a spot I'm not really familiar with. Maybe I just pure call because the sizing is small. I'm getting a good price. But I have like the worst hand in my check back range. Like I have Jack X that I can call with. I have Ace X that I check back the turn with. I'm going to fold this time, but I think call is probably going to be the play for the solver. Okay, there is a small frequency of fold, but mostly call. Yeah. Ace 5-2, this is a deceptively good board for big blind because they have all the straights, they have all the sets, etc., etc. So I am going to check back mostly, but mix in some small bet with the king of spades. We rolled aggressive, so I'm going to put in a small bet this time. I think that's fine. Ace 5-2, 10. Now our king of spades isn't really relevant anymore. We didn't turn our backdoor flush draw, so now we're just sitting here with king high, which I don't think is typically a great hand to turn into a bluff. Maybe we have some showdown value if villain check called with like queen 4 or something. So I'm going to mostly check on the turn, but we do see some aggressive betting on the turn with like large and overbets. This is, I think, I assume to set up a lot of river bluffs. If a spade comes in, having a future blocker again is part of the solver strategy. Also, blocking the 8 of clubs is good for blocking ace 8 of clubs, which is one of the stronger ace X combos that they have to continue with. Right. Also blocking king 10 of spades, which might not have 3-bet pre-flop, but turned equity. So we do have some blocking effects here. Not a terrible hand to turn into a bluff. And then on the river, I am going to pure check because at this point, we have a lot worse hands that can check all the way to the river, like queen 9 suited, jack high, etc. So I'm not going to bluff this one. All right, let's go over 2 more and then we'll wrap it up. Ace 10 6 button versus big blinds. This is again textbook medium strength hand. I think that we're going to mostly just check back here, maybe because we have the backdoor diamonds and the backdoor straight draw with the 6 of diamonds on board. I can sneak in some bets, but I think I'm mostly going to be checking. Okay, so we can in fact turn our hand into a merge overbet. Fun. Or we can small bet. So there's 2 strategies here on an ace 10 board. That is small bet and overbet. If we choose to bet. And that makes sense because ace 10 6, if you have something like top pair, right, it's going to be very hard to get 3 streets of value. That being said, if you have ace king, it makes more sense to go with an overbet. If you have something like ace 4, that makes more sense to go for a small bet. So I think having these 2 sizings makes a lot of sense. Putting this hand in it isn't as intuitive because it is a medium strength hand, I think. Maybe it falls into a weak hand category. Maybe I'm underestimating, or maybe I'm overestimating the equity of a hand like this on this texture. I don't know. Let's see. Go for the filters. Good hands. 10-8 suited. So it is a good hand. Is it towards the top end of the good hands or is it towards the bottom end? Let me check. So 10-8 suited is on the top end of good hands because I think going into the equity buckets, you'll see that good hands is 50 to 75%. So pretty strong good hand, which would make sense as to why maybe we would mix in a bet with this then more often than maybe something like, I don't know, 9-6 suited. Let's see what 9-6 suited is doing. 37% check versus 34% check with the backdoor equivalence. Interesting. Yeah, so you actually see 6x becoming more of a bluffing hand on a texture like this for the overbet sizing. So using bottom pair as kind of like a bluffing future street type of combo, right? So maybe we're triple barreling something like 7-6 suited as a bluff, whereas our value hands are going to come from, you know, all of our really strong ace X, like I was saying. So like I was saying before, it makes sense to have an overbet with ace king, but then with ace 4, you're going to see the small bet. And it's just a matter of like gauging how strong your hand is on a texture. Now I think we can have a multiple strategy here. I think we can either bet small, medium, large, or check. This hand, I think, is just not going to use an overbet ever, so we can eliminate that. So are we going to bet 75, 50, 33, or check? I think it doesn't make... I think we probably don't want to use the 50, so it's probably going to be like this as a strategy. We rolled aggressive, so let's go with 33. Let's see if this works. Nope, just check. Okay. One thing you can do is if you do choose to bet when you're not supposed to bet, according to the solver, you can look at the EV and see how bad or good it is to do that. So you can see the EV is virtually the same as check, very close. And it's better if we are going to bet to use the small sizing here because you can see the other ones are further away from the EV of check than small bet here. So if we were to bet, small bet would have been the choice, but this combo just wants to pure check. And then we can look at our strategy. What does the overall strategy look like on the turn here once it goes check, check on flop, and then we get to the turn. Well, it looks like we're either betting large or over betting. Again, that's going to be the most common thing. I think I mentioned that in a couple of hands ago. Whenever you get to the turn, you really want to polarize. You really want to use these larger sizings. So I should have remembered that and known if I am using these larger sizings and this hand doesn't really want a large bet, well, then it looks like check is going to be the option, right? Now we get to the river and make two pair. I'm going to probably bet large. I think overbet makes sense now because we can get value from all of the ace X and maybe even some hands like 4-5 that block strong hands. And I do in fact overbet. So even though I made a mistake on the turn for betting, it's important that we get the river correct, right? Don't just like throw up your hands and be like, oh, well, I messed up the turn. The river doesn't matter now. It does. There's a lot of EV still left to be gained if you do improve with this hand on river, or if you don't improve and make the right decision. All right. I think I said two more, right? And that was one more. So this is the last one. 9-5-4, two spades. This is a texture where I think we're going to have all of the options. I rolled passive. And we do know that there's a universal check of about 46%. So I think at some frequency we can check this hand. Otherwise, I think we're going to go large or overbet because this is such a strong combo, part of a weak hand category that has a lot of equity that fits perfectly into a polarized range. We have an 8, which is relevant here too, blocking hands like 8-7. That might continue. I think 75 is going to be the most common sizing, and then a mix of 125 and check. So let's go with 75 this time. Yeah, it looks like, again, all the options are fine. But mostly if we bet, we want to be betting large or overbet. Because as I was saying, this fits perfectly into a polarized range of weak hands that have a lot of equity. Not a lot of showdown value, but a lot of potential equity for making strong hands. And again, there was that check frequency there. Turn spade, I'm going to continue betting. Anytime a draw comes in, I noticed the heuristic that the solver wants to size down. So if, let's say we overbet on the flop, we're not really going to overbet the turn. We're going to size down to like a large bet. Same thing with just if we bet small or large on the flop, we're typically going to bet large as our maximum sizing on the turn. That is, unless we have the absolute nuts or very polarized close to it. So this is probably close to it. We can maybe get away with overbet here. But I think our range wants to mostly bet 75. So let's take the risk. I think this is a fine hand to overbet if we are going to find some overbets. Oof. Yeah. I am ever so slightly close to being wrong here. You can see there's a 1.2% overbet frequency, which I would say is mostly a mistake. The solver would say it's an inaccuracy, but yeah. Like I was saying, I think if we're going to choose a bet, the large bet would have been the better one. Even bet 50 is an option here to continue. And now we can't really go all in on the river because villain is still going to have some hands, I think, that might have some full houses, like pocket 4s or 5s that slow played on flop and got to turn and then slow played again. Villain could have jack 4 suited, jack 5 suited. So I think we're going to bet 86 and we're not going to shove. Although, yeah, I think I like 86. So you'll see actually the solver even wants to check back because at this point we overbet the turn, which was a very, very polarized play to make, which means we either have like the nuts or air. So it doesn't really make sense to kind of merge this hand into an all-in bet or to even to a large bet, because at this point we don't block the nuts and villain can have the ace high flush, they can have the full houses, and they have to have a very tight range for continuing versus the overbet. So it might surprise a lot of people, but yeah, checking back the river after the board pairs, which creates more stronger hands than the flush, you'll see a lot of checking back. If the river was a brick, let's say a deuce, then I think you would see a pure bet. But with the board pair, you do see some checkbacks, which is pretty interesting. So last thing before we end, just going to look at if there is in fact an overbet on the turn with maybe the ace high flush. There isn't. So the strategy is pretty clear. We just want to mainly bet 50, 33, or check when the flush comes in, especially the overcard flush card. Maybe if the turn was something like a deuce of spades, we would see more overbets, or large bets. We would see more large bets, but still the majority wants to bet 50 or smaller check. But yeah, putting this into a jack of spades, you can see that if we do have an overbet and then the river bricks off, I think we'll see all-ins. Yeah, we'll see all-ins with king 8 of spades. So if the river did brick, I would have just jammed. And if we had gone the bet 50, which is so common, and the river was a jack of diamonds, what would we have done? Maybe bet 85. I think that was my guess with our combo. Looks like that is in fact the thing to do. So bet 86, and then sometimes slightly overbet. But again, let's say the river bricks. Maybe we can still jam the river with our king 8 suited. We can in fact still jam the river or overbet. Okay. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Study Chronicles. I know I get really deep into some of these scenarios, but I think it just shows how much you can learn through even studying 4 to 5 hands if you go really in depth and try and think about the whys and the logic behind all of the plays that the solver is making, so that you can then take all of that into future scenarios and apply it and continue to get better. All right, guys. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you on the next video.